Last week, we discussed the various challenges that are reducing the value of the FDA. This agency is a critical piece of public health and is often a gatekeeper for the safe and effective products we use every day. In fact, Daniel Aaron, a researcher who focuses on the FDA, believes it's one of the biggest determinants of safety our country has.
People often have the question for me, as an FDA researcher, what they can do to find safer products or more effective products. And my unfortunate message is that I don't think that you can find products that are safe and effective on your own. I mean, there are databases and there are studies that you can try to sift through to find answers. But the truth is that scientists are the best positioned to make these calls. And specifically, scientists who are independent and who are protected and who aren't funded by the industry, right? Neutral scientists. And FDA is our best shot at that.
Aaron is an associate professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. He argues that the FDA is a linchpin in our society that helps us avoid death when we're sick or have a chronic disease. And since it's a century-old establishment, most of the public assumes that the products we purchase won't hurt us because they've undergone FDA review. The first version of this pre-market approval was in 1938 when manufacturers needed to prove that new drugs were safe for the public to use. This was amended in the 60s to include that products need to be both safe and effective.
Now, the 1960s was kind of an era where people believed in the promise of government to solve core social problems. And it was a time after what's called the thalidomide disaster, when there was this drug called thalidomide that was used for nausea in pregnant women. Unfortunately, it caused severe birth defects in thousands of children globally. And so as a result of this disaster, there was an increased attention to the risks of drugs, and FDA was given a lot more authority to oversee drugs. But also concurrently with that, there was also developing authority over food and over the ensuing 10, 15 years over medical devices. So it was kind of in this critical period, largely centering in the 1960s, that we really entrusted FDA to guard our health by verifying product safety and efficacy.
However, as we spoke about last week, there are systems in place that allow a kind of fast track for some items so they don't have to undergo the full pre-market approval. This began in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, which helped expedite the approval of new drugs.
Concurrently, there was also the HIV epidemic, and there was no treatment available at the time. And so we had people dying across our country from HIV. And so there was actually a large mobilization, largely of LGBTQ people, to have expedited access to drugs that haven't gone through the full FDA process.
A movement that was successful in petitioning the FDA to accelerate its processes in times of emergency. However, the value of this expedited process was soon recognized by corporations who were quick to petition for more of it.
Although that was well-intentioned, corporations then entered the fray and leveraged the HIV epidemic and FDA's quicker process to say, well, we have a lot of serious diseases like cancer, like heart disease, and maybe we need to speed approval of all of these drugs, not just for HIV. So that was actually a pretty successful argument. And over the next 20 years, FDA's approval processes changed due to a variety of reasons, including new statutes from Congress, FDA changing its processes internally, and generally approval became much easier.
Thankfully, the FDA realized that if some of their pre-market reviews were going to be less rigorous, there needed to be a sort of checks and balances for the products. This process is especially important for the supplement industry because nearly all of the FDA's oversight happens after the product is available to the public. The idea is that this reduces the barriers for consumers to access products that would otherwise be held up in pre-market testing. However, Aaron argues that one issue with relying on post-market review is that it could reduce the incentives for companies to rigorously test their items.
If you need FDA's approval, then you're going to go try to find that evidence and try to prove to FDA that your product works. If you're allowed to go into the market beforehand, then it's not clear that you have that same incentive. In fact, you can start making money right away. And so that risks a few things. One, there's already profit involved. And so then FDA is put in the position of having to enforce the law against companies that bring products to market and don't comply with evidentiary requirements, right? The post-market review. So that means it has to have staff and lawyers to go pursue these companies. It has to get the Department of Justice on board. I mean, this is a lot of resources to try to get companies to comply after the fact.
Aaron says it's a lot easier for the agency to realize any illegal activity and enforce the regulations before products are released to the public. When we rely on the post-market review, the FDA now has to hunt down evidence and information from all of these companies. And as we discussed last week, they don't have the manpower or financial resources to do this effectively for every new product that's introduced. But even if they did have the time and money, Aaron's not sure it'd make as big of a difference as pre-market approval does. Through his research, Aaron's noticed that for other countries with similar post-market systems, it's rare for pharmaceutical products to get pulled from the market.
Patients do start using drugs when they're available, and it's kind of hard to just take drugs out of the hands of a patient, and especially when some patients might swear by the drug. It could be that a drug didn't help a patient at all, but they randomly just got better, which does happen. But still, there can be this subjective desire to hold on to drugs, even ones that don't really work.
Another hurdle is that companies will often sue to keep their products available to customers.
If you look at regulatory regimes that the FDA runs, that where it does more of a post-market approach, you do see really big litigation. To give an example, with dietary supplements, FDA doesn't really have pre-market review. So companies can usually market a dietary supplement without getting FDA clearance. But FDA can still ban dietary supplements, and it has, although rarely, because it has led to a lot of litigation, right? Companies sue to keep their products on the market.
One prominent example of this is in 2004 when the FDA banned the sale of dietary supplements that contained a plant called ephedra.
Ephedra is a plant, a botanical that was used in supplements to provide energy or weight loss. And FDA thought that this was a very harmful substance. It identified more than 18,000 adverse event reports.
Which is a significant number because these instances are so often underreported. Research shows that as little as 1% of serious and unexpected adverse events are ever reported to the FDA.
But still, FDA had about 18,000 adverse event reports for ephedra, and then it banned it in 2004. And that led to a really big kind of litigation saga. So, and of course, a litigation episode consumes a lot of FDA staff and lawyers, right? So it's just not a very great, helpful process. So all this is to say that once a product is on the market, it's really hard to claw back. And FDA's examples in drugs and dietary supplements provide really good examples of how hard it is to claw back. And so post-market review sounds good, but in practice, it's kind of just allowing the product to market.
So if post-market review isn't the perfect solution to deregulating pre-market approval, what can we do to keep America's health gatekeeper effective? Aaron believes consumers can be part of the solution by showing the FDA that we would rather have safer products than quick access to new items. This public demand helps shape the deregulation response during the HIV crisis, and it can help the FDA refocus its efforts to fit the needs of modern America. You can find more information about Daniel, Aaron, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.